Well, it is 4:30, and I'd like to call the meeting to order today. And I would like to acknowledge that the District of Tofino does operate within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. And I get to add that the fact that we are videoing our recordings, our meeting today, and that in fact it will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. And I was amazed that we have a YouTube channel, and I'm sure the content is riveting, and I will go there as soon as this is over. Could I have an adoption of the agenda today, please?
So moved.
Thank you. First, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And I guess we'll need an adoption of the minutes as well.
I'll move adoption of the minutes.
Thank you. Second, thank you.
2020.
All in favor? Great. Thanks so much. There is and I believe, at least there is a public comment.
No one has signed up.
No one has signed up. Thank you very much. And delegations, negative, correspondence, negative, presentations, and reports. We will move into our presentation today, and I wanted to thank Sergeant Pebernat for coming today, and to invite him to come up to speak today, and to, you know, I look forward to the discussion today, and we'll start out with sort of what we have on the agenda, but I would also make sure that we have time today for questions from council. And maybe, and I look forward to possibly a discussion on further down the road about how we can continue the conversation and what framework that may take in community consultant groups or whatever it might be. And so hopefully we have, I think, approximately about an hour. So we'll try to pace ourselves as we can.
Okay, I wasn't planning to talk for an hour, but you can.
I was going to give you.
I figured it was going to be like me talk for 5 or 10, but if you ask me.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. Yeah.
If I fill up an hour with questions, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to begin by providing a snapshot of how we are doing at the Tofino RCMP in terms of calls for service. I'll give you an update on some initiatives that we are working on, and then I'll answer any questions you may have, even if it's an hour long. Okay, so since January 1st to August 12th of this year, 2020, we've responded to a total of 1,543 calls for service. For the same period last year, we responded to 1,673 calls for service. So year to date, our calls for service are down. However, that said, the COVID shutdown did change things a bit for us. During the shutdown, we saw a decrease in our calls of service followed by a marked increase as the province opened back up. So what I've done here is for March and April, when the COVID shutdown was taking place, our calls for service dropped from 424 calls in 2019 to 330 calls for service during the same period this year. So basically when province was going through the shutdown, not a lot of activity, or less activity for us. Generally speaking, I find in Tofino, particularly over the last 5 years, our calls for service year to date have been trending up. I focused here on our call volume because that seems to be where we really get challenged in terms of our resources and just meeting that demand. So what I've done is the blue on this graph represent all of July and August, and the orange represents July 1st to August 16th. So basically, blue is July and August, and orange is year-to-date as of, I think, yesterday. So you see in 2016, we responded to 256 calls for service over July and August. 2017, we bumped up to 463. 2018, we bumped up to 606. 2019, 614. And as of 2020, where we're sitting right now, year to date, we are trending higher than last year. So I expect that by the time we hit the end of August, this will be the busiest summer that Tofino RCMP has ever had, at least since the inception of Prime and numbers that I can query. Now, it's a bit of an afterthought, so it's not on the graph, but I queried our calls for service for July and August for 2010, so basically 10 years ago. And in 2010, calls for service for us over the summer was 150. So as you can see, our summers are getting busier and busier. Now, managing this increased call volume is becoming more and more challenging for us, given our few number of members. What we have to do with the Tofino detachment is place members on call after service, or pardon me, after their shift, just to ensure that there is a police officer that can respond when a call comes in. And what this is resulting in, this increased call for services, members are becoming more and more fatigued. And really, I call it perpetually fatigued. Once we hit about June, we're all getting tired and cranky, and I'm hearing complaints over and over again about having to do the on-call. Right now, in Tofino, we are staffed with 6 positions, a sergeant, myself, corporal, and 4 constables. All of these positions are provincially funded positions, and I have advocated for additional positions for Tofino, but to date, the province has not increased any of their funding. I've also advocated for federal funding for an Indigenous policing position to serve the Tla-o-qui-aht community, but this probably won't happen until a CTA or a community tripartite agreement is reached. But I'm hopeful that we're on the top of the list once that happens, if that happens. So a few initiatives I'm kind of excited about, the Community Consultative Group, or CCG. And basically what this does is it provides an opportunity to increase communication with the community through leadership, and to provide the community through the leadership an opportunity for timely input on our policing priorities. Typically, you can meet every month if you wanted, every second month. It's really up to the group how much and how often you meet, but it's a good idea. We created one in Ahousaht, or pardon me, revived one in Ahousaht about a year ago, and it's a good forum for the community to give some feedback. My vision for that kind of a group would include a member from the District of Tofino Council, a member from the Tla-o-qui-aht Council, an NCO, myself, from the Tofino RCMP, maybe a Chamber of Commerce member. You can even have someone from the school or a youth advocate. Basically, whoever the group decides should be there to provide input. So that will probably, I put a bug in a few people's ear, but once we get through the busier summer months, I'll be in a position to kind of make some calls and hopefully have a socially distanced meetings. Another initiative we've been working on is mental health partnerships. Prior to COVID and just starting up again, we always had a monthly meeting with our community health partners, Dr. Carrie Marshall and others, just to talk about challenges and certain clients, and to try to have more of a, I guess, a uniform plan in how to deal with people. I am trying to pursue a partnership with Island Health that will see us invite a nurse on a mental health call. Also been in touch with members and nurses from the Surrey program. It's called the CAR 67 program. Where they have a nurse, I think it's a mental health nurse, riding with a police officer and attending calls. So I've had some good discussions with them, and they've been sending me material and explaining exactly how they operate. I know Dr. Marshall and other members of this council are advocates of such a program. A few things that I'm waiting for is an MOU. I've asked the Surrey unit to send me their MOU just to act as a template, something that I can look at and try to just adopt here rather than reinventing the wheel. And once that's done, I will send a briefing note down to my Island District Management just to get their approval for what I want to do and move forward on that initiative. That's my hour presentation. But I just go ahead and I'll try to answer any questions you might have. And I did receive this letter from you from the Squamish, and I'm very willing, if I can answer questions or give you feedback on that, I'm happy to do so. Didn't know how long you wanted me to take, so.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it. I think part of what the expectations, and I don't want to speak for council, but allow them to come today to have this discussion with you. And I'm sure there may be some questions, or maybe specifically around the CCG or whatever framework we might choose to initiate. But I'd like to, I don't know if we've done in the past where we start at one end and work our way around, or if that might be the appropriate approach here. Mayor Osborne, would you like to start from your end, or?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. I think it was really important to Tofino Council that we invite you to come to an open meeting, and in part because it's important to us to demonstrate that we want to have this open relationship with the RCMP and for the community to be able to witness that. And so that was an important factor here. And I appreciate all of this information that you're giving us. And I think, like, in my time being the mayor for the last 7.5 years, I've had a relationship with a series of sergeants. And I I think the idea of expanding out the community's influence and input into policing priorities and also building more understanding and trust between different parts of the community is one of the biggest benefits we could see out of a lot of the things that have taken place, at least for this community to begin with. And I don't come with a grand vision or anything like that. I'm really committed to increasing the amount of communication that we have and our ability to listen to each other so that we understand different parts of the community better. I think the pandemic has really taught us, and you have already touched on this, about the importance of mental health and wellness and how that can affect the relationship between protective services or and people and the island health, the physicians and everybody who helps to keep this community well. I think the RCMP is a really important part of that in our community, and we probably have more work than we even know of to do to make the relationships better, but I really look forward to what we can do. And I think I'd love to hear what other people think about the community consultative group idea. I think that is the step in the right direction for expanding that ability to have those relationships. Sure. And seeing the school involved and I think I'm sure it'll take time and thought
Question for you, if you don't mind, is has there ever been anything like this, like something I can dig up just to see how it went prior to my time here? Or?
Not that I'm aware of. This is the elephant memory here, so not that I'm aware of.
All right.
Mine is like a steel sieve.
I would make this observation that one of the interesting things for me in trying to have a relationship with RCMP as an organization is, and you'll appreciate this too, I know, Todd, how there's that turnover of staff and of sergeants, and it's the same for council too, right? So a group that is more enduring is something so that the next sergeant who walks in kind of walks into something that is deeper and we define it as the community instead of the RCMP saying this is the way we do it or don't do it. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's been, I find, like my time here, I find that this council and the councils I've worked with have always been very collaborative in nature, but the RCMP, maybe partly because it's a paramilitary organization, it really focuses on the mayor and the relationship is with the mayor.
It does.
And that needs to change, I think, is what I'm saying, is that it needs to be more collaborative with council.
And that'd be a benefit of this group is bringing something up like that, because that's the questions I get asked, and everything is directed towards the mayor, but that doesn't have to stay that way. No. I'm very happy to do more, and a group like that would be the feedback we would need, right, or I would need, or whoever is coming after me to say, hey, this is how we do things here. It's, you know what, we talk with everybody. It's not just focused on the mayor, but that's good feedback, because it is absolutely, that's how I was taught how to do it. But that doesn't have to stay that way.
Right.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, I'll stop there for now. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I think the relationship has been just between the leadership of the RCMP and council and the mayor as well. But there's been staff input and different levels of sort of coordinating by law enforcement with RCMP resources, but more about trying to hit the same priorities, so that what council thought areas that needed attention and where they were directing bylaw resources were sort of coordinated with RCMP. But the community collaborative process that we're looking at now is different than anything I can recall. There might have been some informal kind of community collaboration, but nothing like this. So yeah, so I'm happy that's happening, and I'm a little bit disturbed by these increases over the past 4 or so years that we've been tracking, and I'm not sure the reason for that, but we're sort of, in terms of bylaw enforcement, we're seeing the same thing. A little bit more difficulty with dealing with situations whenever they're called out on, and sort of a different level of kind of respect for being enforced on things. So I think that's a good time to start that conversation and get some communication more out to the public through some process like this. I'd like to see that sort of get to a place where council can make some decisions about how to assist those situations. Maybe we need to restrict camping use or campfires or something. And so I hope that that the process doesn't lead to, oh, we don't have enough resources and, oh, we've got to do more. And I hope there's the feedback comes the other way, saying, well, these are some areas that council needs to look at.
Absolutely. And just some feedback, if I may, regarding bylaw enforcement. Well, our enforcement, the police level of bylaws is increasing. I know this summer so far, I think we responded to about 26 noise complaints on the beaches versus I think last year we were like 15 or 16. Going back to 2016, I think it was one noise complaint. But we aren't scratching the surface in terms of what we could be doing in bylaw enforcement as far as proactive engagement. We're not out there really, a little bit, the members are when they have some time, basically going after the bylaw offenses. And not just because we get so busy with the calls for service, that keeps us running, but typically it's always expected that we would do some proactive work in our downtime. And in the wintertime, when we have our downtime, that's when the bylaw infractions seem to kind of dissipate. You don't have the people in the community, right? So when we need it, the members are struggling to get it done. And you have a bylaw department that does that too, but we also want to partner and support them through, our own enforcement. So this is a target-rich environment that we have not scratched the surface on, just because we don't have enough in the summertime to do a lot of proactive police work.
Just, I guess my last comment is sort of, I'd like to hear if there's anything council can do in terms of lobbying the province for that stuff. I'm sure there is, but sort of how to be effective in that. Are we able to sort of have some measures of what we need or what we're short of?
What I find is if I'm not able to get the easy answer, and that is give me another position, I look within and ask myself, can I do better with what I have? And one of the challenges I'm finding here in Tofino is our detachment is basically split into two detachments. So I have a satellite detachment in a house that I'm responsible for. And because of its remoteness, and it's always really difficult to keep a small detachment staffed adequately. So you always have two members there, someone to provide a backup. I can't leave one member on an island 40-minute boat right away. So they take up 4 of my positions. 2 have to go there because they're federally funded, and 2 positions are provincially funded. So they take up 40% of my membership basically, but do 20% of my call volume. So I'm not being efficient with, when you look at the global, it's probably a big word for our little detachment, but if you look at our detachment as a whole, there are some efficiencies that can be captured there. And what I'm trying to do is pull the provincial members in when I can, have them fully staffed to assist and to, come and work in Tofino as able. So that was one thing I'm been looking at as to how I can better use those resources. The partnership with the reservist program, that was a big help. And this year really showed us how much we really missed that. Sometimes it's hard to know what your proactive work, the effect it's having on your calls for service. But I think this year pulling it back showed the number of calls that we've had on the beaches, just how much help it is. So that's something you can help us with if you're able to continue that next year. But we still are, no matter how we look at it, I believe that we should have another position here. And I beat the drum loud over and over again to the district, but it ultimately comes back to provincial funding and money, right? Money from the government. And the challenge here is, one, twofold. There is no formula that I can find as to how many police officers a certain town should have. Like, it's not like, well, your population is this, so you get this many, or your call volume is this, so you get this many. But even looking at that, the challenge here with the influx of tourism is we're we're pretty good for the winter. And then we hit the summer months and we need more members. We need a couple more members. So it's different, right? It's probably more like a Whistler, right? It's probably a good place to look at and learn from.
You need to move officers from a town that gets really slow in the summer. Yeah, ski town. Yeah, that's all.
Well, thanks for coming and sharing, Todd. I love the idea of the community consultative group. I really look forward to hearing more about CAR 67 and efforts in mental health. I think it's all great. Actually, just looking at what you do and the call volumes and understanding the varied nature of all those calls, anything from really noise complaint to crime, to traffic. What if you could vision? What would you like in Tofino? What would your vision be that would make Tofino? I know that the RCMP in the summer has been great, the extra member, Gary. But overall in the future, what would you see?
If it was up to me and I could basically give my wish list, I would say add at least a full-time position to Tofino with an additional 2 reservists over the summertime. And that would help with the call volume. And for holidays, we're always under pressure to burn leave, but then we limit the leave that members can take in the summertime because we need them here. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but at the very least, a full-time provincially funded member and a federally funded member for we call it an Indigenous policing service member to do work in the Indigenous community. I know we're at the top of the list, but I don't believe it'll happen until a CTA is signed, and that's something I can't do. The community of Tla-o-qui-aht needs to work towards that. So, and that would be very good because there's so many things I think that need proactive work, that need long-term, over, 5-10 years to work in the schools and to try to have a positive effect with, some of the social issues that we see that eventually result in criminal issues. So that type of a member could address that and start a plan and carry it on and pass it on to the next Indigenous policing service member. So just resources and different resources.
Thanks.
Yeah, just as an intro, what do you see the role of the RCMP in Tofino is?
Generally, what is our role?
Generally.
Well, we're managing.
How does that compare to, say, a more urban environment?
To who, sorry?
I'm saying a more urban, normal environment. Yeah.
Well, I don't think we're no different than any other community. I mean, we're ultimately responsible to enforce federal and provincial statutes. We have a common law duty to protect the public. So I guess if, in a simple answer, that would be my answer, to enforce the statutes and protect the public. Now, every detachment has its own policing priorities that you kind of establish or develop through the uniqueness of every area. Here, I think we have a big alcohol problem, and in my experience, just ticketing people that are drunk in public doesn't solve the issue because they're much deeper rooted. They're social issues, but we have a role to play in that for sure. Another area, road safety is a concern. We have a road safety initiative as part of our priorities, just because of the number and volume of traffic that we see here. Our members have increased dramatically their contact with offenders. And I say contact because it doesn't have to be a ticket, it can be a warning. But our contact with offenders is way up over what it was 3 or 4 years ago. So that's another important priority. I would like to see, and this kind of goes hand in hand with some of the alcohol problems, but more long-term planning, members tackling the sex assault that we see, a number of sex assaults for the smallness or the size of this community. So that's another priority and an initiative I'd like to tackle, but I think that's really a long-term issue that would be, require people smarter than me to be involved in, right? Social workers and things of that nature. But again, because it often falls on our doorstep, we have a role to play. And I did start making referrals to some people that come into our cells that seem to be struggling with substance abuse, that type of thing, getting them into the care of someone that could help them. So it's, I hope I give you a basic answer what the role of the RCMP, but it's always changing and developing as to the needs and the challenges of the community. And that's where CCG would be very helpful in providing more of that input. And I can provide a CCG with information saying, look, here's where our call volume is going. We're seeing a real spike in alcohol-related domestic files. What can we do to try to have a positive effect on the substance abuse in our community?
Okay, with respect to CCGs, and I'm going to put all the blame to Councillor McQuaid for providing the background information on this. But CCGs, I mean, just as we see in our town hall meetings, they tend to be populated by residents who own their own homes and business owners and landlords. But we don't get the views of renters, homeless people, Indigenous, and those that are poor and marginalised. So if you've got a group of all this, let's call it the 1%, you're not really getting the views of the community, and you're just getting told to focus on quality of life rather than the big issues that are affecting us. And so, although I'm in favour of CCGs, and just from that preamble and what somebody said over there, I'd be very concerned about the composition of that committee.
Well, it won't be dictated to you by me, that's for sure.
No, I'm just, this is just what I'm saying at the moment, and I'm addressing the people in the room. And then, well, I could say a lot more, but research shows that community policing does not empower communities in meaningful ways. It expands police power, but does nothing to reduce the burden of over-policing on people of Indigenous or colour and the poor. And I think it gets back to what you were saying, that you are having to try and sort out all the social problems in the town or any community because of the lack of funding, attacking mental health.
Yeah, and something I point out to people sometimes in our discussion, mostly with the members, is if you were to go to a court date here in Tofino and take a look around, you would probably conclude that the courtroom is overly represented by Indigenous persons. And oftentimes people will assume that the RCMP must be targeting these folks, but that's not how it works, right? We attend to files because we receive a call from a victim who's reporting a criminal code offense, and we go there, we conduct our investigation, and where we can, we try to divert it to a restorative justice, but most of the times it's going to Crown Counsel because we're obligated to send these type of files to Crown Counsel, who either approves a charge or does not approve a charge. So my whole point I'm trying to make is that we're the pointy end of the spear, but the problem is so much more deeper rooted than what a lot of people realize, right? And I think it goes right back to the history, the residential schools, all those challenges, right? The alcoholism that's crept in because of historic abuse and all that kind of stuff, right? That is a problem I can't solve, really. I have a role to play as a police officer, but certainly needs a bigger response than just the police.
That's all I've got to say.
Thank you. I think Councillor McMaster definitely cribbed some of my notes, and our reading lists are the same. So I definitely have a few of the same questions, just regarding kind of what you envisioning as a community consultative group, what the end goal would really be. Mayor Osborne did gesture rightly to the fact that quite often, the relationship between the RCMP and Tofino Council is a sergeant to mayor relationship, and it is a paramilitary organization that receives its marching orders from the top down. So for me to conceive of a community consultative group that has any effect going up that chain of command is difficult for me to conceive of. And even when I think of it in terms of community relations, which I agree are imperative and quite important, this is the system that we currently have to work with, and ideal or not, the relationships we form at this level is very important. The fact that RCMP does have its staff rotating out, provides another problem with having those relationships built and then erased on whatever cycle that happens to be. So I am having trouble, along with the concerns that Councillor McMaster has about the makeup of what a community consultative group would be, of knowing what kind of effect it could possibly have. To wit, I also am wary of inviting anybody from an impacted population or marginalized population to participate in yet another committee that may not have an effect. So I would really be looking before participating to knowing like what our aims were and what you felt appropriate aims and goals would be for a group like that.
Question. First of all, I guess in a brief statement or answer, it'd be communication, right? Opening up communication between myself and the community via leadership. In regards to priorities, I have a lot of leeway as a detachment commander. I am dictated to a couple of priorities from the white shirts. Basically, they'll say, hey, you've got to have a road safety priority, which I don't think anybody would argue with, and one other priority. Usually it's two. I try to keep my priorities down to 4 or 5, basically, because it becomes too much for a small detachment. So if you as a consultative group said, hey, we want you to get after those bicyclists without the helmets, and we want that to be a priority, that's easy for me to do. I can say, all right, we're going to stick that in there. I'm going to find some funds, and we're going to action that. And the way we're going to measure our success is through contact. And that can be through warnings, through tickets, what have you, but just to know that a member is out on the road making contact with that offender. And that's how we measure our success and then see the results of it. But that could be anything, right? As long as it's having some type of positive impact in a policing role on the community, I can change it. I don't want to say I can do what I want, but I have a lot of leeway. In regards to turnover, I totally agree with you. And what I've tried to encourage staffing to do is to manage the cycle that the NCOs are coming and going. By that, I mean myself and my corporal. And I also included like a detachment commander from Sergeant Mancini, just because he is on the West Coast and you kind of get to know your neighboring community. So make sure that if I'm leaving, say I was leaving tomorrow, that the corporal is here for another 2 years. So that transition from the old detachment commander to the new detachment commander is a little more manageable. He has someone he can lean on and ask questions. Stu and I came here together, like I think we're a few weeks apart, and kind of, it was a challenge. Believe me, it was a big challenge. I had no idea what I was walking into. So I'm trying to help our staffing to do a little bit better. In regards to inviting like minority groups or to this meeting, I do meet with First Nation communities. I meet with the leadership this week. I will be, with the chief, with the member of their council that has the justice portfolio. So I do have that interaction, as well with the Ahousaht. COVID has made it more challenging for sure, but basically like I meet with you folks, I try to meet with them. And that's part of the challenge I find in Tofino is being so small is you have so many different people that have input on what the priorities should be. So part of my thinking too is if we're all in the same room as one larger community, it would help me maybe, I want to say kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Balance my priorities a little bit and see if we can kind of work together to reach the same goals. So I hope I answered.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we're not talking at cross purposes, that's for sure. One of the things that if you don't mind, Chair, if I just, one of the things that I was also, as I was trying to conceive of having people in a room, you did rightfully mention residential schools and our Indigenous population, and we are aware of Canada's history and the role of RCMP and how we facilitate a meeting that talks about community priorities in regards to policing, and not just policing priorities in regards to community. It would be definitely my suggestion that we have somebody here that facilitates these meetings in a very particular safe and direct, culturally safe manner. So I just wanted to flag that I don't feel comfortable myself, or that I would feel comfortable, facilitating something as a district of this sort without reaching out and making sure we were doing it in a manner that was of had the utmost cultural safety for everybody involved. So
Absolutely.
I think that was just another thing that I really felt we're mentioning. And also with thanks for being here. I think these are really difficult conversations and really interesting ones and really fruitful ones that we can have. So thanks for answering my questions.
I think I'll take a second, then we'll go for round two if it's necessary. And I want to thank you again, Todd, and acknowledge that, in my other job, I've worked closely for many years with RCMP and have great respect. But it is coming through a very particular lens when I interact and have that. But my interactions and the interactions over the years in RCMP and the communities has been, for the most part, almost all very positive. So I wanted to start with that. I have, it's one of those things where the role of policing in society is a very large question that here at our district level, my main concerns is the role of that in our town and how it directly impacts the members of the deaf community. And one of the interesting things when we talk about priorities and these often are moving targets, and they are hard. That's why I do believe some form of framework of a consultative group, because priorities do change and they do shift over time. And so I am very supportive of a process, and I would echo many of Councillor McQuaid's concerns around the structure, and that's obviously going to be a continuing conversation. I often think about, once again, the role of community health and public safety. And one of the things that we've talked about recently is often we're putting Band-Aids on arterial wounds, and we're not really addressing the underlying issues that stem from it. And I recognize that the RCMP are probably not the mechanism to address those, and you play a certain role in that, and that's where I'm hoping in that in this group that some of those answers may come forward through that process, and so that hopefully that we can start stemming that flow a little better. And I don't know what those mechanisms are, but in terms of a direct question, I'm curious how much in this detachment and in our region, possibly you may know, where mental health calls and calls related to substance use, how much of a factor are those in your day-to-day interactions? And I say that because that's part of that social context that impacts your part of this equation.
If I was on the ball, I would have had those numbers, but I just thinking back, because I do poke around once in a while to see where we're going. I can say they're increasing, absolutely. Year over year, as our call volume goes up, so are our calls for mental health. And what I will do is I will go back to you to tell you exactly the number this year we are year to date compared to last year, and maybe a couple of years, just so you have a clear idea. It's very normal for us to go to mental health calls. It's very normal. It's part of our duties. Oftentimes, it'll come in as a suicidal person, and we'll get called to go attend and make an assessment if they need to be apprehended. Sometimes it's to the hospital. I've been at the hospital in the middle of the night wrestling a mental health patient that's gone violent. So it's very normal in the course of our duties. I don't have the numbers for you other than to say it is increasing, but I can get those by the end of the day for you if you'd like.
Numbers aren't important. I mean, they are, but just in terms of almost anecdotally, you're providing that kind of information. But, yeah. So it is definitely a major part, and you've seen an increase over time, and that those services would be valuable in our community.
Yeah, and the meetings we have monthly, with the exception during the COVID situation, but the monthly meetings we have with Dr. Marshall and other health professionals is helpful. So what we'll do there is we'll talk about certain cases, people that we're seeing, at the hospital in repeat interactions with police, and we'll discuss, hey, what's going on with this person? They might be able to tell us, this is what he's struggling with. Here's some things that you can do to help de-escalate the situation. Here's some things, don't say this, or don't do this, this will go bad. We've had Dr. Marshall is just fantastic supporter, especially with mental health calls. She's come to calls when we're sitting there with a person and we're not sure if we've reached the threshold of apprehending or not. She's come out on occasion and made that assessment herself, or she's come to cells when we were on the fence. Geez, you know, should we be taking this guy to the hospital to be assessed by a doctor? She's trying to help us and coming to us. So a lot of support from her. So we are meeting and trying to have that communication with our health professionals, and with what we're talking about with my last initiative is trying to step it up a little bit more and bringing a nurse with us more on a regular basis. And I should say that I will need approval from my bosses to do that. Everybody, I'd be surprised if they said no. They just want to make sure that we're taking care, you know, that we have a plan to keep the person that's with us safe before we introduce them into an environment.
I'd like maybe to open up for round two, if there was any through the Q&A, there were any others that came up. Mayor Osborne.
Okay, thanks. I have some questions.
Okay.
So given what I said about there has been a kind of mayor RCMP relationship, and obviously that's not going to change overnight. I could write a letter on behalf of council after this dialogue tonight and ask some questions. And maybe we should follow up later, but I would be curious to know what should I ask and say, and who should I ask it to? And part of that is, do you feel that you have the support and resources you need from within your organization to start some kind of community consultative group?
Oh yeah, I don't
Okay, so that's not going to be a struggle, or
no.
it's not going to be, okay,
No.
that's good.
We like I said, we have one in Ahousaht now.
Right.
And through that, we developed a letter of expectation,
Yeah.
what they want the Ahousaht members to do.
Uh-huh.
And we're trying to make it clear, concise direction that's even measurable so that we can make sure we're, you know,
Yeah.
meeting those targets. So that's not a problem.
Okay. And I think I heard you say once the crush of summer is over, this is something, so I think we could expect to talk more about this in the
We could
fall.
make a meeting date today even.
Right,
It's just
okay.
I want to get through the summer. Before.
Okay, and what does that mean, getting through the summer?
Anything after the long weekend in September.
Okay, that's great to know. And then I just want to come back to a question that Councillor Anderson asked, and that really is, should we as council be pushing harder to amplify your voice in requesting additional members, or do you feel that's not necessary?
I don't know. I would appreciate it. I'm not
Yeah.
sure, you know, perhaps with your meetings when you go to the, I think you have the annual meeting and get that opportunity with the commanding officer of BC. Go ahead and bring it up. I'm not going to oppose if you want to write a letter. I don't want to advocate for that. I do know that my line officer is very supportive. I know he writes briefing notes trying to beat the drum a little bit for me as well, saying, hey, we've reached our limit here for this detachment. We need to get some more funding or find a position. I think a little bit of the challenge too, and because the question I ask is, I mentioned I always ask, how can I do better than what I have?
Mm-hmm.
So looking at a district level, I ask, can we do better with what we have?
Mm-hmm.
And you start looking at other detachments, provincially funded detachments, so smaller detachments like myself that are doing quarter of the call volume than I am and have the same number of members. And the question I ask is, well, why do we make such sense to take that position, put that position here? They used to be able to do that, but the province no longer allows that. So the way I understand it is you have to give that position up, and it goes to the province somewhere, and then they decide where it goes. So everybody, all the commanders stopped. They wouldn't volunteer a position to go to another place because they're just going to lose it, right? So, and I have to be clear.
Okay.
There's a lot in that avenue that I don't understand, but I've asked the question, like, let's just do better with what we have.
Right.
Shake the tree over here and give me a member from this detachment. And makes me real popular with those detachment commanders, but
well, maybe we can take some of that heat for you, I think,
Go
is
ahead.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor McQueen.
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment of doing better with what you have, but I also want to take Councillor Anderson's question from a different direction. Like, can the CCG act as an advocacy body to take the heat off of you in other ways, like in terms of advocating for more mental health support, in terms of advocating for more mental health and substance use support? You know, is that something that a CCG can be a part of?
I can't give you an example of it being done, but I don't know why you could not, because you set it up, you know, you have a chairperson and you know, like a committee of any type. I don't see why you couldn't. I'm not sure. So what I do when I ask for an additional member, I don't just get on the phone and ask. I write up a business case and I show the trends over the last 5 years. I show the influx of tourism. I show I include the increase in population in the Indigenous communities as well. I try to give a really big picture trending up, right? Like it's one thing to have one blip, but showing over the last 5 years that we're getting busier, we're getting busier, we're getting busier. And also then I also bring in the members' mental health. We had there was a report done not too long ago where they were talking, you know, is it viable to amalgamate? And in that report, you know, they looked at the call outs the members are having, and that was kind of flagged as boy, your members are getting called out a lot. So that means they're probably pretty tired when they go into these calls, right? You work all day, like you might work till 3 a.m. and then at 4 a.m. you're getting called out, and that might take you 2 or 3 hours or more. And then you have to go back to work. Or you might be the day shift member getting called out to back up the member at 1 or 2 in the morning. And if you're out for 2 hours and then, you know, you don't just fall asleep when you get home, right? You're up for a little while. So now you're getting an hour's sleep and then having to come to work. And it's not a good, you don't want to be in that state going to a high risk call. And that's sort of what I'm flagging as well is, hey, this is a safety issue, I think, particularly in the summertime. This is a member wellness concern. And I'm not getting anybody disagree with me. It just comes down to getting money from the province. I think that's the bottom line, right?
And yeah, and I think more of what I'm indicating there is that you can advocate on that behalf, but perhaps the money or the areas in which a community consultative group can advocate. You know, I'm just trying to think conceptually of a community group bringing forward community concerns,
Yes,
and advocating for them and meeting RCMP halfway. You know, that those concerns can be ameliorated by the community and their advocacy at the same time. Makes it, you know, a collaborative effort.
And absolutely. I don't see any problem with that, but really you're not convincing the RCMP, you're convincing the province, the one that's going to sign the check and agree to it. But I think why not? If it's a concern of the community, you know, that there's not enough police, then we need to go. And it should be a concern because, I mean, there are calls we don't attend to. We don't say we're not attending to, but if it falls after hours, noise complaints, you're probably not going to get a member called out for that. Any call outs have to go through an officer that determines, okay, this is a priority 3, we're not coming, we're not waking up a member for that. It has to be a priority 2 or better. So someone might have to get frustrated and annoyed with a party that we're not attending at 3 or 3:30 in the morning.
Thank you again.
Councillor Anderson. You answered one of my questions. I was wondering if there's a CCG in a house, and so I guess also, is there a CCG for Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation? Is there?
No, I don't want to separate those. I want them to be part of this because we respond to them just like we respond to you. And I'm concerned if I have 2 different priorities with the community that's just outside of the detachment and the District of Tofino, can I really be effective? So my hope, and maybe it won't work and I'll have to revisit it, but my hope is that we could tackle it as one community group. And maybe that won't work, but I'm hoping it does.
I'm just a little worried of sort of there may be some conflict between Ahousaht and being involved in a different way than TFN. I'm not sure, but yeah, definitely that needs to be captured in a strong way, either their own CCG or, you know, good input, good membership with the Tofino one. So it's sort of this land-based basically.
That's how I envision it. And maybe I'm like I say, maybe it's not going to work and we need to look at something different. I mean, I wouldn't want to bring a housing over because it's a very different policing environment, very different policing environment over there than over here. And they have their own own group with their own LOE and they have a CTA. So they have 2 federally funded positions, and that's part of their job is to have that consultation.
Geographic challenge of getting
The geographic
participation
challenge,
as well. So, just one other thing. I'm wondering how, or if you at all sort of work with officers from Parks Canada to resolve any issues. Or
I was just talking with the park warden today. Basically just a shared concern, and some of our clients groups will cross path. I did organize radar training for them last fall because I figured they're there, and half the time we can't make it out, to calls for careless drivers. So they agreed, and we got some of their members radar trained, and now they can enforce, do speed enforcement on the highway. So absolutely we do. Again, I would meet with John occasionally. It's just been telephone calls lately because of COVID, but yeah, just today we were talking.
Sort of that leading into maybe they could participate or might be a possible participant in this group as well.
I think it's a great idea to have them participate. They have as many wardens as I do members, and we do about 2,800 more files in them. So I'd be happy to bring them on.
I don't know what that would mean. I'm not advocating for it, but it seems like
Those are discussions we could have, right?
another part of the discussion. Thanks, that's all.
Yeah, I just have an observation and a question. I've noticed listening to you a couple times now, you do mention the significant mental health, substance abuse, and sexual assault files here in Tofino and area, and that those are in some ways higher than the provincial or federal averages. And I know that when I talk to people about that in town, the general response I get is surprise that is something that people don't know. And I wonder if, from your point of view, is there a way that the general population in Tofino can become more aware of our problems, like the things that we are dealing with, the police are dealing with, and people, these are all people are, on individual levels that are kind of hidden, from the general population. If that maybe even just knowing those stats, knowing the amount of work that's going on to deal with those may help bring it into,
Absolutely. Sometimes some of the things I sometimes wrestle with is I'm cautious regarding stats is I don't want to reflect negatively on any certain community. I think in terms of population, I think we have our sex assaults are high, and not just the numbers, but the MO, the way it happens is very unique in my experience. So, and it all comes back, in my opinion, to substance abuse. So not just on the part of the offender, but on the part of the victim. So that would be a really great thing for social workers to get involved in more of a long-term planning for sure, and long-term goals, I guess, to tackle. I mean, I'm not against it. I can release, stats for sure. I'm just always careful that I'm not reflecting poorly on any certain community.
Yeah, no, I understand. I just to acknowledge that this is a problem, a significant problem.
Sure.
I mean, even that, then maybe knowing that it's a problem will motivate people and give people some tools to say, well, how can we act as a community or even individuals to start, even recognizing it and then start taking action to mitigate it or at least protect the vulnerable.
Yeah,
is ultimately the goal.
I agree.
Yeah, well, one of the benefits of COVID this year has been there's been no shows at Legion, which has been great for me. But last summer, I mean, I definitely noticed an increase in things that had obviously related to mental health. And I've never quite understood, and this isn't just you guys, I mean, I've talked to other police. I mean, I think every one of us could name a dealer in this town.
Mm-hmm.
And the standard answer that I've always got from policemen is, well, we don't want to have to go for the small guys, we're going for the big guys. But things just keep on continuing year after year after year.
Probably didn't hear that from me because I have no problem going after the little guys. In my experience, getting the drug charges, you know, at a local street level, that's proactive police work. You know, it's doing what we call, you know, takeaways from a drug house. It's collecting enough information that allows us to write an information to obtain a warrant to get into the house. And I have brought in Island District GIS to assess different things. You know, we'll get intel about, you know, drug trafficking, and they'll come in, do some surveillance for a few days and make an assessment. I don't think there's been any big charge in Tofino though. In the last few years, I've only had them up here a few times. You know, they were not a lot of times to come up and look at drug charges. I think here you probably do have, you know, being a port, I have no doubt that something's happening and people are trafficking, going wherever they go, or to Councillate and through there, just because we're a port community. But a lot of that is proactive. And I mentioned before, we're not scratching the surface, and what we can do on a proactive basis. It's a target-rich environment. And it just comes back from, you know, our members are busy, and if they do have time, I've been asking them to hit the roads because that has the greatest impact on public safety. That's where, you know, your general public is probably going to get injured. So I've been directing them to do that type of work when they have a chance, have some free time. But I believe you're correct. I think there is a lot of low-level type of stuff that work that could be done.
Raise my hand here. I'll talk to Councillor Stere. Thanks. One of the interesting things, and I touched on it, was addressing sort of those underlying issues, the arterial wounds. There was a better analogy at one of our other meetings, and one of the areas that we're looking at is to begin those conversations are something like our municipal alcohol policy, and I think, and I know you've been contacted in there because I see a lot of these issues, whether it's the addressing that the low-level drug dealer on the street. Whether we start treating these things as public health issues rather than criminal issues, I think may go a long way to addressing some of those problems that you're encountering there. And so when we have something at a municipal level where we can look at a municipal alcohol policy to start addressing some of those, maybe hopefully in the broader conversation, those underlying social issues, and bring the conversation more around to the public health aspect of what ends up being your job, whether it be mental health, often related to substance use and abuse. So I just wanted to bring that up, that, you know, if there are other tools that, you know, from your end of things that can influence public policy, that would be very helpful in those, you know, whatever framework we use, the CCG as we're referring to it, that would be very helpful, because I mean, I do struggle with the public health and the criminal aspect of many of the issues, and drugs, of course, being very central to that. And but substance use in general, we have legal drugs such as alcohol, tobacco, and those others, and others that we define as illegal. And regardless, often they stem from a public health issue rather than a criminal issue. So it was more just a comment, and if through your experience that you know, we're a public policy, and I know we're very limited at a municipal level, but if we can advocate from a municipal level up the ladder, you know, if that ever comes up, that would be.
I think the chief of police in the province of BC has signed a letter basically saying that they don't think simple possession should be a criminal charge, and that just comes back recognizing that it's a health issue. And I don't think they're talking about dealers, but I believe, if I recall correctly, it was someone just in simple possession. So they're it's slowly changing, right? And that's a good thing.
It is slowly changing, yes. Thank you. He didn't have a pen, mine just ran out of ink, so we're.
See if I can.
Councillor Anderson.
I'm sort of, well, just this is quick, but I'm kind of getting down into details, but the liquor store has certain controls and that they use, and they actually limit purchases to people that whatever seem to be there more often than they need to be or something like that. But at the same time, I see really large purchases from time to time going out of the liquor store. And I'm wondering if there's something to involve maybe not the local workers of the liquor store, but the higher ups. Some of their policies seem to be not sort of capturing those kind of purchases that would normally you'd have to get a liquor license to make.
And do they have a license? Or
In cases of, you know, single person buying, it's usually Smirnoff vodka. But I'm not sure if there's policy that might be changed there that might help that sort of abuse or not. Or anyways, it's a detail that I'm just throwing it there.
Any other questions or comments? We have Todd here.
I'll just know it's been exactly an hour.
I noticed it was, yeah, it was right on that minute. That's why I was, yeah. Well, Todd, I want to really thank you for this engagement. It was an invitation from council, and your openness and forthright and coming here is very much appreciated. And I think we've set a tone here, you know, that there will be some further communications and we may talk as council as to possibly how we may construct that moving forward. But once again, I want to thank you for your time here today.
Thank you for having me. Till next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So on the next, our next on the agenda, 7.2, the Q2 update presentation from managers. Woo.
In person.
Wow.
Nyla.
That's great.
It's nice to be back. Nice to be in person. So this evening I'll be presenting on the Q2 2020 finances, financial position. The last report that council received was the Q1 report, and we'll be back in November to present the Q3 report. So how we will do it this evening is I will present my financial officer's report in person, and I'm also presenting on behalf of the manager of protective services. So forgive me if it's brief, and if you have questions, I may not be able to address all of them this evening, but can get back to council after the meeting. And then I will pass it off to the manager of corporate services, and then another couple managers will present via Zoom, and then the director of infrastructure and public works will come down and present in person. So I guess I have a clicker. I do. There we go. So I'll begin by giving council an update on property taxation, and I did bring a report to council not too long ago providing property tax information up to the due date, and I'm going beyond Q2 because I know that's a fairly important discussion to have and keep council up to date on. So everything else will be as of June 30th, but for property taxes I'm going to go beyond that date. Tax notices were sent out the end of May, so we were on schedule for that. There was no delay this year. The due date remained the same, the first business day in July. And I did provide what taxes were collected as of July 2nd, the due date at a previous council meeting. I have an update to that today. There have been no supplementary adjustments to the tax roll up to June 30th. That should say 2020, it should not say 2020. I always catch my mistakes when I'm doing this in person. So 2019 tax sale resulted in 3 properties being sold. 1 property since last year's tax sale has been redeemed, and the other 2 properties have not. So we'll try to provide another update to council at the Q3 financial update. That's the most up-to-date information we have at this time. Currently, there are 10 properties with delinquent taxes, including 1 foreshore property and 4 float homes. Delinquent taxes owing as of June 30th were $33,613. This is 50% lower than what they were at as of Q2 in 2019. That is not a surprise, and it makes sense. There are typically the same properties that go to tax sale about every 3 years, goes to tax sale. And once that happens, all the taxes need to be paid off for the property to be redeemed, and then we don't see them again for another few years. So taxes in arrears are about 35% lower than they were at Q2 in 2019. So what that meant in that year when taxes were due, we saw a higher ability to pay. So we're only seeing 86,625 outstanding. We do have the ability to defer the 2020 tax sale. We're fairly certain that we'll be able to collect on all of the delinquent properties this year. So I'm not going to bring that to council as an option. Even though it is available to us, we won't be deferring tax sale. So as of the due date last year, current taxes receivable, so those are the outstanding taxes after and past the due date that are left to collect for the remainder of the year, is $540,000, so just over $500,000. July 2nd, after this year's due date, we're at about $3.4 million. And council has seen those numbers, and that wasn't a surprise to staff. We were expecting to see a higher tax receivable after the due date because we've deferred the penalty date to October 1st. As of July 31st, just to provide a further update, current taxes receivable went down to $2.6 million. So that is positive and much less than we thought. The balance is quite a bit lower than we expected. So our cash flow position is remaining quite strong, stronger than anticipated. We have not had to use any revenue anticipation borrowing to date, so we're not paying any interest on any outstanding amounts there. We will bring forward an update on Q3, but it's looking positive that if tax collection continues steady the way that it is, and as we get closer to the penalty date, we always see a jump up in payments. So we're expecting that we're going to receive quite a few payments in before that tax penalty date of October 1st. This cash flow position includes the requisitions to the ACRD, which were just under $1 million. So we were able to pay that with no concerns or restraints on cash flow. School and police taxes, we have the ability to pay in the new year. If our cash position remains as strong as it is right now, and we collect taxes the way we anticipate, we should be able to pay those after the tax due or after the penalty date. Just an update on contingency allocation in the general fund. So we started with a high contingency this year and expected to use most of that contingency or see a stronger use of the contingency in Q2 and Q3. So we are sitting at a balance of just over 300,000. So we've used about 100,000 this year, and that's gone towards any anticipated repairs or maintenance that was required. It's gone to increase service levels, and we certainly expected to require those funds as we progress through the year with the uncertainty that COVID-19 had on our service levels and what would be required. We expect a higher use of contingency in Q3, and so we'll bring back a more thorough update on contingency and how that impacted service levels in the Q3 report. 2020 water contingency was set at 94,000, which is higher than prior years. The balance as of the end of Q2 was 71,000. Most of those allocations were spent on SCADA expenses, staffing expenses, and emergency repairs to reservoir. Sewer fund contingency was at 331. The Q2 balance is at 309. That also was spent on increasing service levels and staffing resources, lift station repairs, and critical maintenance that was required. I want to take this opportunity to provide council with an update on any COVID-19 related expenditures that we saw to date as of Q2. If council recalls, there was an approval to transfer $20,000 from the Financial Stability Reserve Fund to go towards expenditures that we wouldn't be able to recover through the province through our task number. To date, there's about $14,000 that have been spent out of that $20,000 that we weren't able to recover. So the majority of that was on legal fees and then a few other expenditures that were denied. So we always try to recover the fees. If they don't technically fit within that policy that the province releases, they may deny some of our requests, and those all, that's the total that we've seen so far to date, or as of June 30th. Reimbursable expenses as of the end of Q2 are about $48,765. We have submitted a couple claims to date, but we haven't heard back on whether they are approved or not. Task force related expenditures were minimal at 182, and that's the 20,000 that council transferred from an unrestricted reserve to cover off any action items that came out of the task force. So I'm just going to bring up a spreadsheet. Just take us a moment here. I'm going to go over that. So I wanted to provide a more thorough update at this point in time on expenses and revenues, and with a particular focus on how our own source revenues were looking. We knew there would be quite a bit of risk against our own source revenues. We did reduce our budgets in all those areas, and we wanted to make sure that we had a high contingency to account for any decreases in the revenues that we would see in our user fees and charges. So I haven't provided the budget for our actual operating expenditures at this point in time. I typically can't provide that, but I will provide that more in Q3 and focus more heavily on the expenditure side. I'm not concerned with any of the expenditures that are sitting with any of the general fund or the water or the sewer fund. We're all within budget for this time of year, and we haven't exceeded any budgets. On the revenue side, I just wanted to focus more on how much we have allocated out of taxation. About 33% of our taxation budget has been expended so far. We don't see expenditures evenly throughout the year, so it's not surprising to see that expense so low. We also collect more revenues than we require, which means through our user fees and charges. So in the water and the sewer fund, we are actually seeing a higher consumption than we anticipated. We were quite conservative with our estimation of what consumption would be, which then would have reduced our revenue that we would bring in. And so we increased the contingency and we transferred some reserve funds in to cover off the operating for that for this year. So we're seeing a stronger revenue position in there, and so that is why we're going to see a higher revenue amount than we are for expenditures in the let's see, which fund is that? In the sewer fund right now. So of the budgeted own source revenues, we're seeing that 72% has already been collected, and what that means is we have seen a stronger source of revenue collection in water and sewer fund, and then we also, what's strongly impacting that is our collection upfront of business license revenue. So under bylaw, you can see that we've collected about $105,000 more than what we required in expenditures to date, but we will see those expenditures continue for the remainder of the calendar year. So I have no concerns with what we budgeted and what we are collecting for our own source revenue at this time. I'll provide a more thorough update at the Q3 financial report. If council has any questions regarding these numbers on this spreadsheet, I'm happy to answer any questions as well as anything that I presented. That's the conclusion of my financial officer's report.
Thank you. If you say it's okay, I say it's okay. Are there any questions for that? Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll just pop back over to the presentation. I'm going to go over a project that we had land under administration, and then I'll go over the protective services updates. So the different, the managers and the directors are going to come up and focus more on the projects that council saw on the project sheets and the budget package that were approved for 2020, and provide more updates on what the budget versus actuals look like for those projects. So my focus was more on the operating side of things. So in administration, we had one project that we had highlighted, which was information technology services. And I believe I have mentioned to council that we've just, this project started, which was the preparation of an RFP to go out to tender for our IT services and have a more managed service provider oversee our IT. As we entered COVID-19, we needed to change our IT environment quite quickly. And it was important for us to remain with a company that had the knowledge that of our organization that was required to make sure that we were able to set up everything as quickly as possible. So we have picked that project back up, and we plan to issue the RFP in the fall or winter of 2020. Okay, I will move on to protective services. So business licensing. This is an update. Typically, we like to provide just a comparison of how many business licenses we're issuing year over year. We are more or less in line with the previous year. We do see more business licenses come in and applied for throughout the remainder of the year. The revenue we've collected to date has been $253, and our budget there was $237 for business licensing. For parking revenue, we decreased our anticipated revenue for parking revenue due to visitation being reduced in May and June. We don't have the numbers beyond that point. We'll provide another update in the Q3 report. So those revenue numbers, these are in relation to bylaw notices. The revenue numbers on the bottom are as of Q2 of each year, and they're comparing where we're at this year to date at 5,353. Based on, this is up to June 30th, so it's not surprising to see that number so low, given that visitation wasn't as high in the early part of the year. For March, April, May, June, part of June.
What made it so high in 2017-18?
We had a particular individual we had working for us. Was very efficient at writing parking tickets.
They're still around.
Did we all get one? I know.
No one on this council got one.
I did.
I did.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I paid it. I wasn't like Councillor Pitt.
Oh, okay.
There's a balance.
I wasn't on council, but I got one that year.
We've got three.
Thank you, Nigel.
So moving on to the fire department, training and incidents for 2018, 2019, and 2020. So these are annual numbers that are being provided here. We are seeing that there's a shift from year to year depending on the type of year and the number of calls. This year we're seeing an even split between training and incidents. That's due to reduction in overall calls as a result of the order that the fire department could not respond to medical calls for safety and to preserve PPE. So not surprising to see that number lower. For training, we are continuing to train within the fire department. Most of the training has moved to online, so we plan to continue to expend the training budget that was set out for the year. Okay, I will pass it over to the manager of corporate services.
I'm going to stand. I'm kind of trapped.
Okay.
So I only have one slide for you today, and it's the logo and brand refresh project that was budgeted over 2 years in the financial plan. It is budgeted in 2020 and 2021, and we've expended most of the budgeted funds for 2020. However, this project is somewhat on hold for the remainder of 2020, and we expect to pick it up again later this year or early on in 2021 due to a lack of resources in the corporate services department for a while, some personal circumstances of the consultant, and COVID-19 in general. So we still do expect that the project will be completed on time in 2021 and will impact the brand and logo and style of all district communications going forward. Any questions if there are any? Not, I'm going to pass it to the Manager of Community Sustainability, who is on Zoom, and I'm just going to make sure that he is.
Great, thank you. I'm assuming everyone can hear me because my own face just showed up on my monitor. We're going to start with the commercial and industrial land use analysis. This is one way to describe this is as a regional growth strategy or a mini regional growth strategy for the West Coast. At this point, we haven't expended any funds. It's a project being managed by the District of Tofino-Ahousaht. They've contributed an equal amount of funding. We're also working with Tla-o-qui-aht, the ACRD, the Tla-o-qui-aht Nation, the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, and also received a grant from ICE-T. We're currently, we've issued 2 RFP proposals. We're actually on our second one. We received 3 proposals, and we'll be looking at those over the next week or so, and then hopefully choosing someone to carry out the work and would have it completed by the end of the year. The intent behind this is to develop, to understand what's happening in terms of land use, to support future OCPs, integrated community sustainability plans, and projects such as the development cost charges bylaw. It will look at all types of land use within the region, and then also provide a high level understanding of what type of servicing may be required over the next 10 to 20 years to realize the certain types of growth. I guess I should just do per thing. So any questions on the commercial and industrial land use analysis? Next slide, please. The zoning bylaw rewrite. I think we're all fairly familiar with the zoning bylaw. We're deferring this project to 2021 to accommodate the length of time it's taking to complete the official community plan. I hope to have a first reading of the OCP in front of council in October, possibly a report prior to that in September. And so we would hope to begin the zoning bylaw rewrite quite soon after that in early 2021. Again, this project will also support the development of the subdivision development bylaw or refinement of that bylaw, as well as future financial plan regulations and bylaws. Next slide, please. So fast. Moving on to recreation, we have the community hall condition assessment. This project has not started. It was delayed somewhat due to our resourcing in recreation and concerns related to COVID and the community hall. We expect to start the project early fall. It's going to be a combination of myself, Fraser, and Nicholas Henderson to undertake this project. We'll be hiring a professional group to help us through this. The idea is, again, to understand what the needs are in terms of maintenance and repairs for the community hall over the next 10 or so years. Advanced slide, please. Floodplain bylaws 2020. This project is the help us move forward from the data we've collected through the floodplain mapping in 2018 and the comprehensive coastal flood risk in 2019, and develop bylaws that support the findings of those reports. It may include amendments to the OCP, zoning and building bylaws, and the development of a flood, and then finally development of a floodplain bylaw. We're currently working with Tla-o-qui-aht as they are going through the same process, and we're hoping to realize some savings in working together and potentially developing bylaws that are, in and around 80 or 90% the same, and then different based on our topography and bathymetry. That's so far been a pretty helpful approach. Nicholas Henderson is our main focus there, and working with Bruce and John from Coulee-Aouht Planning. Final slide, please. The emergency response plan will be underway again in early fall. There'll be stakeholder engagement with the EPMC and the EPEC, staff and council. Again, this will be a broad level plan, helping us describe what a future response to a variety of different emergencies will be. It'll be sort of set up to be, again, very high level, so it's a plug and play depending on the crisis that we're facing. And that does it for community sustainability. I think I'm passing it on to public spaces, cultural and visitor initiatives. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Aaron. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. So the first project I'm going to talk about is the multi-use path extension project. As you can see on the slide, this project began in 2019, and the slide shows that the expenses are broken down into 2019 and 2020 expenses up to the end of Q2. The project is going well overall and is tracking on budget. Excavation was more significant than anticipated, resulting in some additional cost to the project. This has also meant some additional import fill has been needed to fill up the trail structure up to the grade of the road. Some additional clearing was required due to danger trees that pose risk to workers, as well as had future potential to impact the trail. And we had some geotechnical challenges, some challenging conditions, including a section of high plastic clay that resulted in the need for some design changes, including some design changes to the prefabricated bridge that is on drainage 6. The contractor is working to complete all the in-stream works during the current summer fish window, including the installation of the bridge, and asphalt paving is planned for late September. And staff will be able to provide a more thorough project update following Q3, when most of the expenses for this project are in. Next slide, please. The seasonal shuttle service was deferred to 2021 due to COVID-19 related operational challenges. So no expenses have been incurred. Next slide. Centennial Park Riparian Restoration. This is an ongoing project with Central West Coast Forest Society, who is able to leverage outside funding. And while it says no expenses have been incurred, there has been some work that has been completed and is underway. Water quality monitoring is being completed at 3 locations in the creek, as well as further work on the 2 constructed rain gardens and further stream cleanup and habitat restoration. And this work is being completed by Central West Coast staff, along with Tla-o-qui-aht environmental monitors. Next slide. Going back to, Campbell Street. Do we miss Campbell Street?
We're on Campbell Street.
We're on Campbell, perfect. The detailed design for Campbell Street Phase 3 was to take place in 2020, and the civil survey and initial concept design was completed in late March, but paused due to COVID-19 response activities and general uncertainty. Stakeholder and public engagement on the concept plan has been postponed until the fall of this year and is planned to be substantially virtual due to required distancing, but will include virtual walkthroughs of the above ground components of the project. So we'll be able to really illustrate to folks what the project will look like. And I think it'll be neat to try that technology. We do know that there will be underground infrastructure that will need to be addressed as part of any civil work within these 2 blocks. And construction is to be funded significantly by Resort Municipality Initiative funding. However, this will need to be leveraged with additional outside funds. So we'll be looking for those grant funds once we know a little bit more about the scope of the project. Next slide. Multi-use path improvements. This is the section that was recently resurfaced from Hellison to just past Beaches Grocery. Not all of the expenses were in by the end of Q2. There's a couple more finishing touches to go, including a fence near Mackenzie Creek, but is easily well within budget and has gone fairly well. And I think that's my last slide. And I'll introduce, although I think he's in the room with you or should be by now, our Manager of Infrastructure and Public Works, Fraser Work.
Well, actually, I will introduce
Right on cue.
Director of Infrastructure and Public Works. This is, it's unusual. It's been an unusual year. Fraser started with us on March 23rd, and we immediately canceled council meetings for weeks. But as we're getting more back to a new normal, we'll be seeing more of Fraser in person and on screen. Just a refresher for council, Fraser was the Director of Infrastructure and Public Works for City of Victoria for 5 years before coming here. And prior to that, was an engineer in the Royal Canadian Navy, retired at the rank of commander, I believe, and decided the municipal world was where it's at. So we're very fortunate to have him here. And he's hit the ground running and has some really great news for you now.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for having me. Is that the?
Oh, it's actually on the podium.
Oh, is it this one?
Yep.
That's all right. Yeah, wonderful to be here in Tofino and also in person in front of council today. Having never been in this room with you before, or actually I tell a lie, once during a property application for Lynn Road. But yeah, I took the chance and opportunity to be here in person today. So thanks very much for having me. As Bob said, lots of good news coming up. I'll walk council through a number of the projects that were obviously in place before I got here, and hopefully provide some assurance to council that we're going to be able to get these on track. So bear with me as I step through these updates for council. So the Mackenzie Beach Road improvements are underway, although meager totals potentially at the end of Q2. We've seen quite a bit of activity in the last month or so getting back on the design for this particular project. We've retained consultant support for the design, and we've taken all the material to try to synthesize it in what will be a set of options for council to consider in the next couple of months when we finalize both the cost estimates for those designs as well as the details of the cross section and the alignment and the end of road treatments. I'll just provide council with a little details. Earlier this year, a cost comparison was completed by geotechnical engineers that really were taking a harder look at what kind of pavement lifespan we would get from the different treatments. As I understand it, the original intention was just to pave the existing subsurface, which the engineers sort of cautioned that might only be about a 5-year design life. And in order to regroup around what would be a more prudent investment of the taxpayers' well-earned tax dollars, under April and Aaron's leadership, they went back and looked at a couple different options to explore. I would highlight for council that the budget for this project, which is on the screen there, which is about $380,000, which includes an RMI contribution, would be largely expended by the shortest lifespan of the pavement, and more costs would be required to intervene and build up the subsurface of the road to get it to last a reasonable standard, which would be north of 15 years, ideally even longer than 20 years. Some of the costs associated, and that is just the paving of the right-of-way based on a cross-section that have been floated, which is a MUP of 3 meters, a 3-meter eastbound lane, and a 3.3-liter westbound lane. That price tags that were offered up for just the pavement, which sort of stemmed from about $360,000 to about $550,000, depending on what kind of engineering you do on the subsurface of the road, don't include things like the transportation amenity improvements and the beach access, parking design, and other public realm amenities that would be required when you would put in a multi-use pathway, which is garbage receptacles, utility work under the ground, culvert redesign, permitting, environmental permitting, and different normal project costs that you would consider to be very much reasonable for a project of this scope and at that location. So that understanding was dawned on me very quickly in the process, and we decided that we had to regroup and come back to council with a set of options and a more detailed, comprehensive, and firmed up set of costs so that council could make a decision on the way forward. We are operating under the intention to have whatever we choose to complete by May long weekend of next year in time for the tourist season. That being said, we do have to step through some approvals with you in this room in a little bit so that we can actually define in detail the way forward. So the intent is to complete the design concepts 3 options at least, as well as the costings associated with each, and bring those back to council for review so that we can make a decision and potentially get on to tender following that. The costs can be mitigated somewhat from a conventional road building project to use some advanced geotechnical reinforcing materials. There is some cost savings potential based on how you would just generally construct a road. The problem with this, obviously the subsurface of this road is what some engineers would call a logging road made good, which is a lot of our roads, but have a lot of organic materials that continue to decay and move underneath the gravel and the fill. And that creates a lot of problems for when you want to actually invest more on what's on the surface. The next update is the Olsen Road storm main. This project did not have a current design when I arrived and was not shovel ready. Although there was a design from 2013 that was abandoned as part of the rising archaeological costs associated with the water main. The permitting requirements, as well as the upland development potential and future looking requirements for the stormwater to service have all sort of evolved over the intervening years, and a renewed design is required to align with more modern permitting requirements. So that design is now underway with consulting engineer support. And there's also a risk that could potentially exceed the allocated budgets for 2020. This project has to consider, like I said, the upland developments, both on the Olsen Road frontage as well as on the upland portion across the highway for future developments, to make sure that all of that drainage and water that's coming downhill to get back to the ocean is managed appropriately, and we steer clear of some of those sort of stopgap interventions that we see on Olsen Road today. This project has the heat and light on it from my office that it deserves. And again, we'll be back in front of council with some more information so that council can make an informed decision about how we would like to move forward. I'm not in a position right now to say, to provide other cost estimates of options 1, 2, 3, because we don't actually have that set of analysis complete. But we will be back in front of council soon to provide a bit more information. One of the cost drivers for this project will be the archaeological management for the site, which we know is a site of 2 previous civilizations and a lot of archaeological artifacts and materials which have to be carefully managed throughout the process. We do have a recent risk assessment for the archaeological issues on the site that was done in June of 2019, and that is informing the project plan as we go forward. So that's a significant body of work that's already been complete and important to inform our cost and our approach. The fleet replacement, somewhat of an easy one. There was one vehicle, Vehicle 5, which is an older 2-wheel drive Dodge pickup truck, full 3/4 ton, that was slated for replacement this year. And we took a bit of a program pause around COVID when we were reassessing budgets. And I haven't replaced this one yet. And part of the reason is that I don't necessarily believe that like-for-like replacement is what we need here. We are in somewhat of a relationship with Dodge that I'm not sure we want to continue. We want to, and I use the term right size because it gets less emotional response from certain individuals that drive the trucks and need them when that day they needed a really big one, it wasn't available. Can be a requirement hit, but we want to size our vehicles and design our fleet around what we would need for the most amount of time to be as efficient and sustainable as possible. It's still very likely that we would replace this vehicle soon. We need to replace that vehicle. It is beyond its economic service life. But in all likelihood, we're replacing it with something that's smaller and potentially even looking at the used marketplace for some benefits. We don't put a lot of kilometers on our vehicles here, and 3-year lease returns is somewhat of a sweet spot from a maintenance perspective. So I'm working with Nyla and Bob and the team about how we might want to step through on some more sustainable, enduring fleet management strategies. So we'll be more information to follow on this one, and especially in 2021 financial plan. The Bay Street water treatment upgrade, which is the latest installment in some upgrades that have been affected already, which is the liquid chlorine upgrade that happened, I guess, about 18 months ago. So the budget numbers here and the contingencies are a bit misleading because they apply to overall projects that phases have been completed, as far as I understand. The Bay Street project, in essence, is the introduction of UV treatment plants for a second form of treatment at the Bay Street location. Obviously at Ahousaht, we have filter media as well as chlorination. Here we have just chlorination, and the second to be within legislative boundaries is to have a second form of treatment to safeguard water for public consumption. When I first arrived, the project was nearing 90% design completion using WSP consultants, and they provided me with a Class B estimate of $1.7 million. And the budget remaining is about 700 and change. So that was a start, and had to regroup with the engineers on a pretty significant value engineering exercise, going back to first principles in a lot of areas where we wanted to look at this intent, which was to do a second and newer building next to the old legacy building to house the UV cells. With the shavings that we've done so far, and by no means are we complete, we've got the total down to 1.1 million now, but I don't think we're there yet. That was basically consolidating all the equipment in the existing building. We had to check if that was a smart idea, because that existing building is old and we've had some problems there too, and we didn't want to be throwing new money at something that was going to need a whole bunch of investment in the coming years. So this project is under some review. There's additional costs associated with the design spiral, going back from 90% and actually kind of retracing our steps a little bit to talk about how we could fit these UV cells in the existing building. Do we have the right maintenance envelopes? What about the diesel generator on the top of the road, which is about a $260,000 price tag, I think, just for that unit. So there's quite a bit of analysis still to come, but I'm looking at this project as obviously it's one of the more mature ones in the pipeline for getting it ready for tender. Hopefully we'll be in a position to finalize that for council's consideration. There is some time constraints on the UV purchase and some of the project elements that are actually supported by external funding. Nyla's making sure that I'm on track with that stuff, and we have to make some smart decisions soon, and those will be part of council's consideration as we move forward. So there is some value engineering that has been achieved, but I think we have another step or two to go before we feel like we've sort of peeled the onion in enough detail to actually demonstrate that we've got the value for money in that project. Is that good news, Bob? DCC technical report, somewhat easier. We've deferred this based on everything I've said just up until now. We're getting on this. This is a very important piece of work to get right. I was at arm's length from this equivalent project in the city of Victoria, where there was a 15-year sort of legacy DCC program that needed updating. I wish I had more to bring to the table for this one, but I'll be learning and supporting both Aaron and Nyla and the other managers in what we can do here to renew these systems as they pertain to my asset groups. But that is we have to get back on track in the Q3, Q4 for this year. Wastewater treatment plant, I feel like the Q2 update is a bit redundant based on the briefs that you've had from Bob over the last little while. So I think council's up to speed on this one, and we're preparing a body of work to bring back to council late September, early October with analysis and some recommendations on the way forward. And the next 4 slides are all sewer related to increased capacity. There has been some challenges with the sewer utility when it comes to managing high flows, especially during the wet season. It is understood and assumed that the majority of these high flows are due to rainwater infiltrating the sewage system, either through leaks in the system or improper connections or illegal connections upstream. The body of work that surrounds these capital works was also the engineering analysis to define what magnitude of a problem that was and how much it was leading to our capacity shortfalls in this area. So the next projects are on hold until I'm able, with consultative support, to move the infiltration and inflow study forward so that we can have an informed set of recommendations on how we want to manage this, which may likely include significant engagement and liaison with different people that are connected to the service within our community and on the outskirts of our community. So I think the smart thing for here is what I would recommend is that put these on hold until we understand the problem completely. And we have looked at all of our options to reduce the burden before we end up actually investing in capacity increases. We may be in a position where we still have to search for those capacity increases, even though we found savings in the I&I. My hope, and many municipalities wrestle with this issue, is that we can actually make significant gains in the I&I management to the point where it limits or reduces in a meaningful way the amount of taxpayer investment we have to make in what would be, I would say, is probably not the wisest fashion. The wisest fashion would be to really understand the issues and go after the cause factors first. So if I flip through those, lift station 1, twinning of the force main, and the first one, which is the multi-upgrade, constitute those bundled set of projects that are all associated as step 2 and so on after the step 1, which is the I&I study. So that's a tour of my stuff for Q2, and we'll hopefully have some more meaningful information and maturity and recommendation sets to bring forward to council in the coming months, so that council gets that confidence back that we can get some of these projects back on track for actual implementation and construction, and so those services can be approved for the community. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you.
Questions?
I kept waiting for the really good news.
Okay.
That was good news.
I think that was the presentation was good news.
That was heat and light right there.
I think we just earned all our money right there.
That was phenomenal.
That was great.
It was good news.
Okay, I will conclude the presentation. There's nothing further on the Q2 financials but managers are still online here if anyone has any questions.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Nyla. Very much appreciated. So I think we're still have another item on our agenda. 7.3 is our action tracking report and corporate services.
That's great. I don't have a presentation like the Director of Financial Services said. We have all managers here available to answer any questions about ongoing items that are listed in this report. We compile it at the Q2 session each year and are open to hearing from council if you have any questions. To clarify what this is, if you haven't seen it before, it is a list of pending actions that result from council resolutions. So that's what this is. Please.
I do have a question on, unless there's.
I have a few, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just was curious, not, sorry, at least some of these are dating back to 2015 and I'm curious as to, do we have the ability to strike some of those to get them off of this list if it was appropriate to make it a little?
To rescind a motion of council is possible, or to direct staff otherwise is also possible. There are many options available to you as council, and depending on how the conversation goes at a certain council meeting, or if you'd like to see something brought forward in a different way that has been on our to-do list for quite a long time, that's certainly within your purview to direct us to do that.
Thank you. Mayor Osborne.
Thanks. Yeah, along those lines of rescinding and kind of cleaning up this list, I think this is worth discussion maybe through the strategic planning process that we are hopefully going to undertake in the next weeks or months. Because, well, first of all, it's just that things change and priorities change, and something that might have been important in 2015 might not be as important anymore. And I think it's important to kind of clean it up. But in a sense too, it gives me, when I'm looking back at it and I look back at some of the older resolutions, there are things that are still important, but they just, they just kind of don't get done for various reasons. And I just wonder if there's a better way to present some of this, or a better way to revisit it on that biannual or annual basis to kind of refresh our memories that when we put new work on staff's shoulders, old work that we've asked them to do naturally has to go somewhere. And I think we can see where some of it goes. But I feel like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that staff is probably a little more intimate with this list than council is. And if I am incorrect, I'd love to know because I looking at it go, yeah, there's a lot of things here that they need to be dropped, or they need to be kind of moved up the chain. there'll never be a perfect way of presenting this, but I think at the regional district, we've gone through this in the last year where we've also looked at this really detailed list. And one thing that the staff at the regional district did do that the board found quite helpful was rather than present them in a chronological order, it was a bit more of a link to the strategic plan and kind of what was the board's highest priority, and then here's where those things are at. And it was helpful to keep tracking it that way, so that the things that were lower priority, it was easier to look at the dates on them and not feel too badly about it. I think this is really helpful. It's useful to have. I just think some of it can be. I think we would all feel better actually too if it was cleaned up. I mean, I think our staff would feel better about knowing there's some things on there. But I also think as this is maybe the first time this council, certainly with Councillor Law here, has really kind of dug into a list like this to see what was going on back in 2015 and, you know, in the three of our minds anyways. Yeah, I'll stop there for now.
In a sense, it's either cleaning up and a prioritization of what is on here as to the relevance or.
Yeah. It also reminds me, as the chair of many of our meetings, that clearly worded resolutions are very helpful, and some of these are a little vague.
Councillor Anderson, did you have
I think Mayor Osborne covered off the questions that came to my mind about basically how to reduce some of these things, reprioritize, and maybe lose some of the items that haven't been pending for a long time. I just have one question around pending. That can mean on hold, it can mean on hold for a reason, it can mean waiting for whatever more information or something like that. So is there any way of maybe detailing it more than what pending means for each of them is probably slightly different?
So this is generated from a software that we use that has 4 different outcomes: complete, active, pending, or postponed. So we don't have too much play with the status as it's set out in the software, and that's where the comments come into play in terms of what pending means per action. It is quite different depending on whether we're waiting on information from a third party or it's our own internal process that needs to be completed. Yeah, there is definitely a distinction to be made, and hopefully it's somewhat borne out in the comments, but we can try and be a little more detailed when we present the comments to council. And to Mayor Osborne's question about linking to the strategic plan, we've actually decoupled this from a separate report that we bring forward in Q3, which is the strat plan update. And they used to come forward together. And I think it was just a bit of a, I'm not sure why we decoupled them, but we do a strategic plan update on where we're at in terms of council's priorities each fall. Whereas this is sort of day-to-day business presented at Q2, snapshot in the middle of the year on a few of the items that have taken place at a council meeting. Because of course not everything has been directed at a council meeting in the strategic plan yet. Things have not necessarily been actioned, especially in the first year of a council's term. Certainly open to bringing those forward together if that would be more helpful to see sort of what is in the plan and what the actions are on staff's to-do list.
And I'm just curious as to in what form or where would we, is it another committee of the whole where we would have this discussion as to what our intent would be, or do we bring this forward at council? Or I'm not sure what mechanism we use to, or is it in the strategic plan where we have that discussion and then bring it forward from there?
I mean, in terms of the linking that Elise was just
yeah.
So yeah, I think it's usually committee of the whole that we.
It is a committee of the whole,
yeah,
and we would do that at the Q3 update is where we would bring forward that report, but this could come forward again so you can see them together. The other option that remains with council is to bring this up at your strategic planning session that will happen in the future. I don't know, Bob, do you have any comments about that or?
I think that we're trying to get a strat plan session together for the fall. Might be a good time to look at not only like what are our priorities, but how we're reporting, how we're communicating with each other about how we're executing those priorities. Yeah, and this is something that we bring to council ideally twice a year. That's just not necessarily priority items, but items that council has asked us to do. So I like having this separated from the priority piece, from the strat plan reporting, but certainly open to other ideas that we may be able to talk through in a few weeks.
One of the reasons why I'm suggesting or thinking about how the two can be linked better together, and I'll use this example as the business license rewrite. We've been talking for many years about the fact that there's many problems with different sections of the business license, the business regulation bylaw, and that it needs to be updated. And we will tackle an issue like short-term rental regulations or something, and then what comes back is yes, and we're going to do this big update, so that piece of work gets delayed. And then a year later, we come up with another area that needs focus, like safety on marine vessels, and we talk about a tweak we could make in the business license and regulation bylaw that would help that and just smooth things up and meet some of council's priorities. And then it gets brought up that the business license, the bylaw is going to be updated, and that gets delayed. And so I think that's a little bit of why I'm suggesting this is that like how do we do this better so that either we just admit that we're not going to do a wholesale review for several years, because here it's now postponed till 2021, but can we deal with some of the tweaks and that are in other resolutions here and get them taken care of? Because for us as council, that gives us a sense of accomplishment, and it also gives us a sense of accountability to the community where we're saying these are things that are important at the time and we're going to do them, and we want to be able, we have to embrace this tension a little bit better, I think. And I think the business, that particular bylaw is one. And the other area where sometimes there's that tension is things like the public property use bylaw, which is the oldest resolution that's on the books right now. Things like reviewing the fines and schedules. To me, what I really like about that one is it lists out, yes, that staff is taking a really methodical review of different sections and bringing them one at a time to council, and we're dealing with them. And so again, I feel that sense of accomplishment there where I just am not seeing it in some other places that I think we would really like to. And then how long does the Chamber of Commerce have to ask for the money that we said we would give them in 2016? Is anybody watching? Yeah, so things like that, I guess we have to figure out when they're stale dated, and I think if staff wants to be proactive in bringing things forward to say, you know, at the end of this year, here's the things that are 2 or 3 years old, and you know, we want to check back in with you. Do you want to wait for us to go through this list on a meeting like tonight and say, here's all the ones we think that you should remove, or do you want to come to us too and say, you know, our sense is that this might be less important? And I think I'm sure we would be happy to have a discussion that help us feel better about the things that aren't as important anymore. But it's also great to see this too, just to see the tremendous amount of work that is getting done. And so I really thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other? I think, I'm not sure if, how we move this direction here, other than I think there's been several suggestions that possibly at our strategic planning, which we're anticipating for the fall.
So maybe more of a conversation at strategic planning, but certainly I think that the idea that some of the things that have been pending for bluntly too long, you know, we can talk as a management team and come up with some ways, whether it requires external resources to get them unstuck, or a reallocation of internal resources to get the same thing done, because I'm not hearing from council that these things aren't relevant anymore, and I don't think it's staff's view that you know, the things that have been pending for a while are not relevant. relevant anymore. So I think that we maybe owe you a little bit more of an explanation that we have for you tonight about how we're going to get those things working again. So that will happen shortly.
Any other comments before we?
I'll say it's a lot shorter than it used to be. So thank you.
We are not closed off.
You sure are.
So moving on, I don't believe there is any unfinished business. And is anybody lined up at least for a
No.
Q&A? Well, that takes care of that. Anyone would like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'd love to make that motion.
I thought so, Doug.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor? Great, thank you, everyone.